Eliza, we need to talk. Richard Keller's voice carried that artificial gravity executives practice in mirrors. I recognized it immediately. Termination tone. My stomach tightened as I followed him past curious eyes and whispers into the glass. Conference room everyone called the Aquarium. Fitting, since I suddenly felt like I was drowning. Please sit. He gestured to a chair while positioning himself at the head of the table. Human Resources Director Vanessa Mitchell sat beside him, her expression professionally blank, folder neatly centered before her. Bad sign. I'll stand. Thanks. My voice remained steady despite the thundering in my chest. 5 years at Helix. Innovations, from entry-level analyst to director of strategic development, and I could read the writing on the wall. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Suit yourself. Richard adjusted his custom-tailored suit jacket, a $5,000 Armani he'd mentioned in no fewer than 3 meetings last week. This isn't working out, Eliza. We're terminating your employment, effective immediately. The words hit like expected. Artillery. You know it's coming, but still flinch at impact. On what grounds? I kept my voice measured, professional. The same voice I'd used presenting the expansion strategy last quarter that had increased company profits by 26%. We're restructuring the department. Your position is being eliminated. Richard didn't meet my eyes, focusing instead on a spot just above my left shoulder. Classic tell, he was lying. My position? The one you expanded just last month? I arched an eyebrow. The one handling the Meridian acquisition that's projected to increase revenue by $40 million next year? Vanessa cleared her throat, sliding a document forward. We've prepared a separation package, 2-month severance, standard NDA, and continuation of benefits through the end of the month. I didn't touch the papers. This is about Project Phoenix, isn't it? Richard's eyes flickered. Another tell. This isn't about any specific project. Interesting. Because when I presented the financial projections showing your pet initiative would lose the company millions, you said, and I quote, I won't forget this, Eliza. I placed my palms flat on the table, leaning forward. That was Tuesday. Today's Friday. Your allegations are unfounded and, frankly, unprofessional. Richard straightened his monogrammed cuffs. The decision has been made at the highest levels. By highest levels, you mean yourself and that golf buddy you appointed as COO last month, I smiled thinly. The same buddy who owns shares in the supplier you insisted we use for Project Phoenix? Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. This clearly wasn't in her termination script. You're walking a dangerous line, Eliza. Richard's voice dropped to that quiet tone he used when threatening junior staff. I'd consider the NDA very carefully before making accusations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I laughed then, a genuine laugh that visibly unsettled them both. Richard, you have no idea what a dangerous line actually looks like. I straightened, adjusting my much more modest blazer. I'll have my desk cleared within the hour. Security will escort you. His tone suggested this was somehow a victory. Standard protocol. Of course. I turned to leave, then paused. One question, Richard. Did you ever actually read the full Meridian acquisition report? He waved dismissively. I reviewed the executive summary. That's unfortunate. I offered a smile that didn't reach my eyes. You might have learned something. The security guard, Marcus, who'd shared pictures of his daughter's ballet recital with me just last week, looked apologetic as he followed me to my office. Colleagues watched with that uncomfortable mixture of sympathy and relief. It wasn't them. Darcy from marketing mouthed, "Call me," when Richard wasn't looking. I didn't need the cardboard box they provided. My personal items fit neatly into my leather. Tote I'd learned years ago not to nest too comfortably in corporate spaces. The framed economics degree from Cornell, the small plant Jimmy from accounting had given me, a worn copy of Competitive Strategy by Porter. 5 years reduced to a bag's worth of trinkets. My department watched silently as I walked out. Most avoided eye contact, though Nate, my senior analyst, gave a slight nod that conveyed everything words couldn't. He'd been with me on Project Phoenix, running the numbers that proved it was financial suicide. He'd also been with me on the Meridian acquisition, uncovering the hidden potential Richard had dismissed. Poor Nate. His days were likely numbered, too. Marcus walked me to the lobby, murmuring, "This isn't right, Ms. Chen. Everyone knows it." "Thank you, Marcus." I smiled genuinely at him. "How did Lily's recital go?" "She was the best one up there." His face brightened momentarily. "Got the video. On my phone if you ever want to see it." "I'd like that." I handed him my access card. "Take care of yourself." Outside, September sunlight mocked the ice in my veins. I walked half a block before stopping at a bench overlooking the river that divided downtown. Pulling out my phone, I made a single call. "Michael Keating's office," answered a crisp, professional voice. "Tell Michael it's Eliza Chen." And tell him Richard finally did it. 20 minutes later, I walked into the understated offices of Keating Capital Partners. Unlike Helix's glass and chrome monument to corporate excess, KCP operated from a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and strategic minimalism. Michael had always said wasting money on appearances meant you probably were wasting money elsewhere, too. His assistant, Eleanor, greeted me with a warm smile that held a hint of conspiracy. "He's waiting for you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? The blood of your enemies in a nice Merlot glass?" That startled a laugh out of me. "Just water for now, thanks. Let's save the blood for when we have something to celebrate." Michael Keating hadn't changed since our days at Cornell. Still the same intense eyes, perpetually rolled-up sleeves, and the focused energy that had made him a millionaire by 25 and a billionaire by 35. At 40, he commanded one of the most successful private equity firms on the East Coast while maintaining a remarkable anonymity, by design. He looked up as I entered, assessing me with the precision of a master chess player. So, Richard finally showed his cards. Project Phoenix. I took the seat across from him, accepting the water Eleanor brought. Exactly like we predicted. Michael nodded, pulling up something on his tablet. His loss. Our gain. The preliminary assessment is complete. Helix is vulnerable exactly where we thought. I leaned forward. The Meridian acquisition? Their board approved it based primarily on your analysis, which Richard presented as his own work. Michael's mouth twitched. He's built his entire expansion strategy around it, without understanding the underlying mechanics. I shook my head. Classic Richard, taking credit for work he doesn't comprehend. Which makes this the perfect time to move. Michael turned his tablet toward me. On screen was a complex financial model, the result of 2 years of careful planning. Sumner Group increased their position last week. Barclays is getting nervous about the tech sector. 3 board members have quietly sold shares recently. They know something's coming, I murmured, scanning the data. They just don't know. What? Meanwhile, we've been acquiring shares through 7 different entities since you first noticed Richard's Project Phoenix obsession. Michael pulled up another screen showing ownership percentages. We're currently at 16% collectively. Not enough for control, but enough to make noise. What about Davenport? I asked, referring to Helix's founder and current chairman, who still held 23% of the company. He's concerned. Richard's been pushing him to retire fully for months. Our sources say he's receptive to alternatives. Michael sat back. Your Meridian analysis impressed him. He just doesn't know it was actually yours. I absorbed this information, the pieces clicking together. So we continue as planned? Accelerated timeline. Michael's eyes held mine. You've been preparing for this possibility for 18 months. Are you ready to pull the trigger now that it's real? I thought about Richard's dismissive wave, his refusal to look me in the eye, the casual cruelty of discarding 5 years of exceptional work because I'd challenged his pet project. I thought about the colleagues watching me walk out, the projects left unfinished, the strategies I'd built that Richard would now dismantle through sheer incompetence. Yes? The word carried the weight of absolute certainty. Let's do this. Michael nodded once, reaching for his phone. Eleanor, please ask the team to come in, and tell Jensen we're initiating Protocol Lazarus. While we waited, Michael studied me. You know, most people would be falling apart right now. Unemployment tends to rattle even the steadiest hands. I smiled, taking a sip of water. I'm not unemployed, Michael. I'm just between jobs. Specifically, my last job at Helix and my next job at Helix. He laughed, a rare, genuine sound. This is why we've been friends for 18 years. You've always played the long game better than anyone. The door opened as Eleanor ushered in Michael's core team, Jensen Ross, legal strategist extraordinaire, Amara Washington, financial operations specialist, and Theo Burke, corporate communications expert. All people I'd worked with before in various capacities. All people I trusted. As they settled around the conference table, Michael remained standing. Ladies and gentlemen, Eliza has been terminated from Helix. We're initiating the acquisition plan effective immediately. Timeline is compressed to 90 days. Jensen raised an eyebrow. Challenges? Richard will realize something's happening within 2 weeks, I replied. He'll make defensive moves, but they'll be reactive rather than strategic. Davenport? Amara asked. Receptive but cautious, Michael answered. He needs to see a clear alternative to Richard's leadership. Media positioning? Theo looked up from his notes. I leaned forward. Richard staked his reputation on Project Phoenix and the Meridian acquisition. Only one of those is viable, and he doesn't know which. We use that. For the next 3 hours, we refined the plan that had existed hypothetically for months. Now, with my termination, it transformed from theoretical exercise to operational strategy. Roles were assigned, timelines established, contingencies mapped. By evening, we had our battle plan. I would operate behind the scenes while Michael's firm increased their position. Jensen would approach Davenport with concerns about Richard's leadership. Amara would analyze vulnerabilities in Helix's financial structure. Theo would monitor market perception and prepare communication strategy. As the meeting concluded, Michael walked me to the elevator. You'll be working from here? For now. Eleanor's set up the office next to mine. Thank you. I hesitated, then asked the question that had lingered since my termination. What if we're wrong? What if Richard somehow makes Project Phoenix work? Michael's expression turned serious. We're not wrong. You ran the numbers. I've seen the projections. Project Phoenix isn't just bad strategy, it's potentially criminal negligence. Richard is betting the company's future on technology that doesn't exist yet, from a supplier owned by his golf buddy, while hiding the true costs from the board. And the Meridian acquisition is brilliant, which is why he stole your work. Michael pressed the elevator button. In 3 months, either we'll own Helix, or Richard will have destroyed it. Either way, he loses. The elevator doors opened, but I didn't step inside immediately. I built 5 years of my life in that company. And Richard threw it away in 5 minutes. Michael's voice softened slightly. That's why this isn't just business, Eliza. It's justice. As I rode the elevator down, I reflected on the day's dramatic shift. This morning, I'd walked into Helix as Director of Strategic Development. Tonight, I was orchestrating its takeover. My phone buzzed with a text from Darcy. OMG, are you okay? Everyone's saying Richard fired you over Phoenix. Call me. I slipped the phone back into my pocket without replying. Darcy was kind, but loose lips could sink strategies. There would be time for explanations later. Outside, the evening had cooled, the river now reflecting city lights rather than sunshine. I paused again at the bench where I'd made my call to Michael hours earlier, gazing across at the Helix building dominating the skyline. Richard would be celebrating tonight, probably at Maison with his executive team, drinking overpriced champagne, to toast eliminating a troublesome director who asked too many questions. He'd sleep well, believing he'd neutralized a threat. I smiled into the gathering darkness. Richard had no idea what a real threat actually looked like. It looked like me. The temporary office at Keating Capital Partners became command central within days. Michael had arranged for a dedicated secure server, multiple monitors displaying real-time market data, and a private conference room accessible only with biometric authentication. Paranoid, perhaps, but necessary given what we were undertaking. Day 3 post-termination brought my first insight into Richard's next moves. Nate, my former senior analyst, sent a carefully worded email to my personal account. Coffee sometime? Lots happening at the old place. Harrison taking over your projects. Phoenix moving forward despite minor setbacks. Meridian timeline accelerated. Miss your guidance. And I forwarded it to Michael with a single comment. It's begun. Harrison Palmer was Richard's yes man, a mediocre analyst with exceptional skills in one area, agreeing with Richard. If he was taking over my projects, especially Meridian, disaster loomed. And accelerated timeline meant Richard was rushing to cement his position before anyone could question my departure too deeply. He's panicking, Michael noted when he stopped by my office later. Pushing Meridian faster indicates he knows there's vulnerability there. Because he doesn't understand the integration requirements I built into the acquisition model, I replied, pulling up the complex spreadsheets I'd created. Look at Phase 3. The technology transfer requires specialized knowledge of Meridian's proprietary systems. Knowledge Harrison definitely doesn't have. How long before that becomes apparent? I calculated quickly. 4 weeks at most. They'll hit integration barriers by then. Michael nodded thoughtfully. That gives us our first pressure point. Now we need intelligence on Phoenix. That intelligence arrived unexpectedly the next day. Darcy from marketing finally reached me after several attempts. Eliza, thank God you answered. Are you okay? Everyone's talking about what happened. I kept my tone neutral. I'm fine, Darcy. Just taking some time to regroup. It's such bullshit. Richard's going around saying your negativity was holding back innovation, but we all know it's because you questioned Phoenix. Her voice dropped to a whisper. And you were right to question it. The preliminary testing results came back yesterday. The core technology isn't performing anywhere near projections. My pulse quickened. That's unfortunate. How's Richard handling it? He's doubling down, telling everyone it's just development hurdles and pushing for more investment. He's presenting to the board next Thursday. She paused. I shouldn't be telling you this. Your secret's safe with me. I kept my voice casual. How are things otherwise? Honestly? Terrible. Richard's on the warpath. 3 people from your team have already quit. Nate's hanging on by a thread. And Harrison is way out of his depth. On Meridian. She sighed. Everyone keeps saying Eliza would know how to handle this. After reassuring Darcy that I'd land on my feet and extracting a promise to stay in touch, I immediately convened with Michael's team. Richard's presenting Phoenix to the board next Thursday despite failed technology tests, I announced, watching as Jensen made notes. This gives us our opportunity with Davenport. Jensen nodded. I've already established contact through his estate attorney. He's willing to meet privately. What's our angle? Amara asked, running calculations on her tablet. Simple truth, I replied. Richard is pushing a failing technology while accelerating a complex acquisition he doesn't understand, all immediately after firing the person most knowledgeable about both. Michael leaned forward. And we position ourselves not as hostile takeover artists, but as salvation from Richard's mismanagement. Exactly. I pulled up the company's organization chart on the main screen. We also need to identify potential allies within Helix, people who might provide information or support when the time comes. For the next 2 hours, we went through the executive and management teams, color-coding each based on loyalty to Richard, relationship with me, and potential value to our plan. By the end, we had identified 12 key individuals who might be receptive to a change in leadership. "What about the board members who've been selling shares?" Theo asked. "That suggests they're already losing confidence." "Good point." Michael pulled up the shareholder registry. 3 directors have reduced positions in the last quarter. Margaret Chen, no relation to you, Eliza, William Foster, and Raj Gupta. I knew them all peripherally. Margaret never liked Richard, thought he was too flashy. Foster is risk-averse, so Phoenix would scare him. And Gupta is a technology purist who'd see through the smoke and mirrors. Perfect. Jensen made more notes. I'll find ways to connect with each. Nothing direct, just feeling out their positions. The next week passed in a blur of data collection, strategy refinement, and careful positioning. Jensen arranged a meeting between Michael and Chairman Davenport for the day after Richard's board presentation. We monitored stock movements, noting the continued quiet selling by knowledgeable insiders. Theo prepared media materials for multiple scenarios, and I crafted the most detailed analysis of my career, a comprehensive report on Helix's current position, the true state of Project Phoenix, the potential of the Meridian acquisition if properly managed, and a 5-year growth strategy that would increase shareholder value by an estimated 340%. This is... Michael paused, reading through the final draft. This is exceptional work, Eliza. It needs to be. I closed my laptop. It's not just a takeover plan. It's my job application for CEO. The day of Richard's board presentation arrived. Through our network of contacts, we learned that it had gone poorly. Richard had glossed over the technology failures in Phoenix, focused on accelerating Meridian, and when questioned directly about my departure, had characterized it as mutual agreement due to strategic differences. That night, I received another text from Nate. Disaster today. Board unconvinced. RK blaming supplier for Phoenix issues. Davenport asked pointed questions about your departure. Harrison fumbled Meridian timeline explanation. Storm coming. I forwarded it to Michael with, "Tomorrow's meeting just got more interesting." The following morning, Michael met with Davenport at the latter's country club, while I remained at KCP, anxiously awaiting news. 3 hours later, Michael returned, his expression revealing nothing as he gathered us in the conference room. "Gentlemen, ladies," he began formally, "we have a situation." My stomach tightened. Had we miscalculated? Davenport is not only receptive to our concerns, he's actively looking for a way to remove Richard from leadership. Michael allowed himself a small smile. However, he has conditions. Jensen leaned forward. Such as, first, he wants assurance this isn't a strip-and-sell operation. He founded Helix, and its legacy matters to him. That's reasonable, I noted. What else? Second, he wants to meet you, Eliza, privately. He remembered your presentations from previous board meetings and said, and I quote, "That young woman was the only one who ever gave me straight numbers without the corporate theater." Pride warmed my chest momentarily. When? Tonight. His estate in Westbrook. Michael fixed me with a serious look. This is critical, Eliza. He needs to believe you're not just seeking revenge, but that you have Helix's best interests at heart. I do have Helix's best interests. At heart, I replied, completely honest. The fact that those interests directly oppose Richard's continued employment is just a bonus. That earned a chuckle from the room, releasing some tension. There's one more thing. Michael continued. Davenport revealed that there's another potential buyer circling Helix, someone with connections to Richard's supplier for Phoenix. The room went silent as implications settled. If Richard's golf buddies company acquired Helix, Phoenix would move forward regardless of viability. Richard would remain in power, and the company would eventually collapse under mismanagement and failed technology investments. Timeline just got compressed again, Amara observed, already adjusting projections. Significantly, Michael agreed. We need to move within 6 weeks, not 12. Can we do it? Jensen asked, looking directly at me. I thought carefully before answering. Rushing increased risks, but waiting created greater ones. Yes. If Davenport supports us and we can bring those 3 board members on side, then it all hinges on tonight, Michael concluded. Charles Davenport's estate reflected old money, understated elegance rather than ostentatious display. The Georgian mansion sat on 20 acres of immaculately maintained grounds, with a view of the ocean in the distance. As the security guard escorted me from the gate to the main house, I mentally prepared my approach. Davenport was in his 70s, but remained sharp as a tack. He'd stepped back from day-to-day operations 5 years ago, appointing Richard as CEO based largely on impressive quarterly results. What he hadn't seen was how those results were achieved. Aggressive cost-cutting, deferred maintenance, and financial engineering that looked good on paper, but weakened Helix's foundations. The housekeeper showed me to a wood-paneled study where Davenport waited, standing by a fireplace despite the mild evening. Ms. Chen, he greeted me, extending a hand. Up close, he looked older than in board meetings, but his eyes remained alert and analytical. Thank you for coming on such short notice. Mr. Davenport, I shook his hand firmly. I appreciate the invitation. He gestured to a leather chair. Please sit. Drink? I'm having scotch, but there's wine, water, whatever you prefer. Scotch is fine, thank you. I accepted the tumbler he offered, taking a small sip before placing it aside. This wasn't a social call. Davenport settled into his chair, studying me. Michael Keating says you have concerns about Helix's current direction. I do. I met his gaze directly. Project Phoenix is built on technology that doesn't work. The Meridian acquisition is being rushed without proper integration planning, and Richard fired me because I presented data proving both points. If Davenport was surprised by my bluntness, he didn't show it. I remember you from board presentations, always prepared, direct without being confrontational. He sipped his scotch. Tell me what you think is really happening at my company. For the next hour, I laid out everything. The fundamental flaws in Phoenix, the potential of Meridian if properly managed, Richard's pattern of prioritizing appearance over substance, and the damage his leadership was doing to Helix's long-term prospects. Davenport listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he stood, walking to a desk where he retrieved a folder. You know, he said, returning to his seat, when Richard recommended terminating your position, he presented a very different picture. My pulse quickened. What did he tell you? That you were undermining company initiatives, creating discord among the executive team, and had developed an unhealthy fixation on proving him wrong. Davenport opened the folder. He provided a dossier of examples, emails taken out of context, meeting notes selectively quoted, performance metrics creatively interpreted. Anger flashed through me. None of that is... He held up a hand. I'm aware, Ms. Chen. Richard's always been skilled at presenting data that supports his narrative while omitting anything contradictory. It's why he was such an effective COO. And a dangerous CEO? I added quietly. Indeed. Davenport closed the folder. Which brings us to the question of what happens next. Mr. Keating mentioned you're concerned about another potential buyer? TechVantage Holdings. Davenport's expression soured. Controlled by Victor Lansing, who coincidentally owns the supplier developing Phoenix's core technology. The connection was worse than we'd thought. That would create a significant conflict of interest. It would ensure Phoenix moves forward regardless of viability, with Helix essentially funneling money to Lansing's other company. Davenport sighed. Richard, of course, would remain CEO in such an arrangement. How far have discussions progressed? Lansing has approached 3 board members already. Initial talks only, but moving quickly. He fixed me with a serious look. Which is why I need to know exactly what you and Michael Keating intend for Helix if you gain control. I reached into my bag, retrieving the report I'd prepared, printed on premium paper, bound professionally, with Davenport's name embossed. On the cover. "This is my vision for Helix's next 5 years," I said, handing it over. "Not Michael's, not KCP's, mine. I've included detailed financials, market positioning, R&D direction, and organizational structure. You'll find no plans for asset stripping, workforce reduction, or corporate dismantling." Davenport weighed the report in his hands before setting it aside without opening it. "And what role do you see for yourself in this vision?" The moment of truth. CEO, with a leadership team selected for competence rather than compliance. And Richard? Terminated. Immediately. I didn't bother softening it. Davenport surprised me with a dry chuckle. Direct as always. He stood, extending his hand again. "I'll review your report tonight, Ms. Chen. Michael tells me your group controls approximately 16% of Helix currently. With my 23% and potentially 3 board members' support, you'd have effective control." I shook his hand, heart racing despite my calm exterior. "Does that mean—" "It means I'll call Michael tomorrow with my decision." Davenport walked me to the door. "But off the record, Ms. Chen? I built Helix to last generations. I won't let Richard and his golf buddy destroy it for short-term gain." As the car returned me to the city, I texted Michael just 2 words, cautiously optimistic. Tomorrow would determine whether our plan moved forward or whether Richard would continue dismantling the company I'd helped build. Either way, I was done watching from the sidelines. The game was accelerating, pieces moving quickly across the board. Richard might think he'd removed me from play entirely, but he'd forgotten the most important rule of chess. Sometimes, a pawn that reaches the other side becomes the most powerful piece on the board, and I had just reached the other side. Davenport's call came at 7:13 the next morning. I had barely slept, reviewing potential scenarios while waiting for his decision. Michael took the call in his office while I paced the hallway outside, attempting to interpret the one-sided conversation through glass walls. The wait lasted 11 excruciating minutes before Michael's door opened. "He's in," Michael said simply. Relief and exhilaration flooded through me. "Completely?" "With conditions." Michael gestured me inside, where Jensen and Amara were already waiting. "He'll support our bid and bring his shares, but he wants a board seat post-acquisition and veto power over any decision to break up the company for 5 years. Reasonable, Jensen noted. Protecting his legacy. There's more. Michael leaned against his desk. He's arranged a meeting between Eliza and 2 board members, Margaret Chen and Raj Gupta. They're already concerned about Richard's leadership and Phoenix's viability. When? I asked, already mentally preparing. Tomorrow morning. Private dining room at the Metropolitan Club. Michael handed me a folder. These are their backgrounds and concerns, according to Davenport. I scanned the documents quickly. Margaret Chen, Harvard MBA, former tech executive, now serving on multiple boards. Raj Gupta, MIT-educated engineer turned venture capitalist, known for his technical acumen and direct questioning. Both questioned Richard extensively about Phoenix yesterday, Amara added. According to our source in the boardroom, Richard became defensive when Gupta asked for raw test data. Because the data proves Phoenix doesn't work, I said, continuing to read. What about William Foster, the third director who's been selling shares? Conservative investment banker close to retirement, Jensen replied. Davenport says he follows Margaret's lead on technical matters. If we convince her, Foster will likely follow. What's our timeline now? I asked. Michael pulled up a projection on his tablet. Accelerated. With Davenport's support and potentially 3 directors, we make our move in 3 weeks. We'll continue, increasing our position quietly through multiple entities. Richard will fight back, Jensen warned. Once he realizes what's happening, let him. A calm certainty settled over me. Every counter-move he makes will be reactive, not strategic. The more he fights, the more mistakes he'll make. The meeting with Margaret Chen and Raj Gupta the next morning was surprisingly straightforward. Both directors had worked with me peripherally during board presentations and recognized my expertise. More importantly, both had grown increasingly concerned about Richard's leadership style. He dismisses technical questions as getting lost in the details, Gupta explained over coffee. But that's precisely where Phoenix falls apart, in the details. And the culture has changed, Margaret added. Turnover is up 40% in highly technical roles. People who question decisions are marginalized or leave. Like you, Gupta said pointedly. I nodded, sipping my tea. Richard terminated me because I provided analysis showing Phoenix would fail and questioned his acceleration of the Meridian acquisition, which he presented as his own work, Margaret noted sharply. Several of us recognized your modeling style in those projections, Eliza. That confirmed my suspicion. Richard had stolen my work without understanding it. The Meridian acquisition has tremendous potential, but it requires careful integration. Richard's accelerated timeline ignores critical technical dependencies. So we have a CEO pushing a failing technology project while rushing a complex acquisition. He doesn't fully understand, Gupta summarized. And he fired the person who created the acquisition strategy. That's correct. Margaret and Raj exchanged glances. What exactly are you and Keating proposing? Margaret asked. A leadership change, I replied simply. Michael's firm, working with other investors and Mr. Davenport, is prepared to take a controlling interest in Helix. I would assume the role of CEO with a mandate to redirect resources from Phoenix to more viable projects, properly execute the Meridian integration, and rebuild the company culture. And Richard? Gupta raised an eyebrow. Would be relieved of his duties immediately. Another glance between them. We'd need to see a detailed plan, Margaret said. Financial projections, integration strategy, organizational structure. I reached into my briefcase, retrieving 2 copies of my report, personalized with their names, like Davenport's. Already prepared. As they flipped through the comprehensive document, I could see their expressions shift from skepticism to interest. This is quite thorough, Gupta admitted, lingering on the technical integration sections. I've had time to think about it, I replied with deliberate understatement. By the end of breakfast, both had agreed to review the full proposal and speak with Davenport. It wasn't a firm commitment, but it was progress. Foster will follow Margaret's lead, Michael confirmed when I returned to KCP with the update. If we get these 3 plus Davenport, we'll have 4 of the 9 board members and 43% of the shares. Not enough for outright control, Jensen noted. But enough to force a shareholder vote, Amara countered. With proper proxy solicitation, we could win. Especially once the true state of Phoenix becomes public, I added. Richard can't hide. The technology failures forever. The next week brought a flurry of activity. Our quiet accumulation of shares continued through various investment vehicles. Davenport arranged discreet conversations between me and other key investors. Margaret, Chen and Raj Gupta contacted us with follow-up questions about my plan, which we took as a positive sign. Meanwhile, inside Helix, the situation deteriorated further. Nate reported that Richard had begun blaming the Phoenix development team for execution failures while continuing to promise the board that breakthrough results were imminent. Harrison was floundering with the Meridian integration planning, missing critical technical requirements I'd built into the acquisition model. Then came the first sign that Richard sensed something amiss. Darcy texted on Thursday night. Emergency. Executive meeting called for tomorrow morning. Richard looking paranoid. Asking IT to review all outgoing communications from senior team members. Something about loyalty concerns. He's feeling pressure, Michael observed when I showed him the message. But he doesn't know from where yet. How close are we on share accumulation? I asked Amara. 22% as of market close today, she replied, checking her tablet. Combined with Davenport's 23%, we're at 45%. Not enough, Jensen frowned. We need at least 2 of those board members to commit their shares as well. I'll call Davenport, Michael decided. Time to increase the pressure. The following day brought the break we needed. Margaret Chen contacted Michael directly, requesting an urgent meeting. Within hours, she was sitting in our conference room, her usual composed demeanor visibly shaken. Richard has lost control, she announced without preamble. This morning's executive meeting was disturbing. He accused unnamed team members of corporate sabotage, insisted Phoenix's failures were due to external interference, and suggested someone was leaking information to competitors. Is there any truth to that? Jensen asked carefully. None, Margaret replied firmly. It's paranoia. When Gupta requested the latest Phoenix test results for Monday's technical review, Richard claimed the data was being revalidated and unavailable. Then he announced he's bringing in consultants to review department loyalty. Witch hunt, I murmured, thinking of my former team members still at Helix. Precisely. Margaret straightened her shoulders. Which is why I've decided to support your initiative. Raj agrees, and he's speaking with Foster as we speak. Michael leaned forward. What changed your mind? Richard's instability threatens the company I've helped guide for 7 years, Margaret replied simply. Eliza's plan offers a viable alternative to watching Helix implode under his leadership. With Margaret's commitment, things accelerated. Rapidly. By day's end, Gupta had also confirmed his support. Foster remained cautious but agreed not to oppose the action. Combined with Davenport, we now had 4 board members aligned with our plan. The final piece came unexpectedly from Richard himself. The following Tuesday, Nate sent an urgent message. RK just announced Phoenix demonstration for full board Friday. Claiming breakthrough. But dev team says nothing's changed. They're being pressured to fake results. This is it, I told Michael. He's getting desperate, forcing a demonstration of technology that doesn't work. Or worse, having them fake results, Michael added gravely. Either way, it's securities fraud if he's misrepresenting material information to the board. We need to move before Friday, I decided. If he somehow convinces the board to double down on Phoenix, regaining control becomes much harder. Agreed. Michael looked to Jensen. Options? We have 45% of shares between us and Davenport, plus verbal support from directors representing another 9%, Jensen calculated. That's 54% potential support in a shareholder action. Legally, we can call for an emergency board meeting with our 4 aligned directors. Do it, I instructed. For Thursday morning, before Richard's Phoenix demonstration. On what grounds? Amara asked. I considered the question carefully. Material misrepresentation of project status to shareholders and the board. Specifically, Phoenix's technical failures and Richard's attempts to cover them up. Jensen nodded, already drafting documents. I'll prepare the paperwork. Davenport will need to make the formal request as chairman. I'll call him now, Michael said, reaching for his phone. That night, I barely slept, reviewing every aspect of our plan, anticipating Richard's potential countermoves. preparing my remarks for what would be the most important meeting of my career. By morning, everything was in motion. Davenport had formally called for an emergency board meeting at 9 a.m. Thursday, citing urgent concerns regarding project status reporting and corporate governance. All board members had been notified, including Richard, who was reportedly furious. "He's called in outside counsel," Amara reported, reading from her phone, "and he's trying to reach Davenport, who's conveniently unavailable." "How confident are we in the vote?" I asked Jensen. "We have 4 solid: Davenport, Chen, Gupta, and now Foster. Richard has 2 loyalists. The remaining 3 are unknown, but we only need a majority." Michael handed me a small velvet box. "For tomorrow." Inside was a pair of elegant jade earrings. "My mother's," I explained, touching them gently. "I wore them to my first board presentation at Helix. Seemed appropriate to wear them to my last." "Not last," Michael corrected. "First as CEO." As Thursday dawned, our plan was set. In just over 24 hours, I would walk back into Helix, not as the dismissed Director of Strategic Development, but as its new Chief Executive Officer. Richard had no idea what was coming. Thursday morning arrived with crystal clarity, both in the cloudless autumn sky and in my purpose. I dressed with deliberate care: a charcoal gray suit with subtle pinstripes, crisp white blouse, and my mother's jade earrings. Professional, polished, powerful. "Car's waiting," Michael said, appearing at my temporary office door. "Nervous?" "Focused," I corrected, gathering the leather portfolio containing my presentation materials. "You're not coming?" "This is your moment," he replied. "Besides, my presence would only give Richard another target. Jensen and Amara will be there representing KCP's interests as shareholders." The drive to Helix headquarters felt surreal. 3 weeks ago, I'd walked out of that building escorted by security, carrying my personal items in a tote bag. Now, I was returning with the backing to take control of the entire company. "We're here, Ms. Chen," the driver announced, pulling up to the main entrance. "Thank you." I stepped out, took a deep breath of morning air, and walked through the doors I'd once thought I might never enter again. Marcus, the security guard, did a double take. "Ms. Chen, I didn't expect—" "Good morning, Marcus," I smiled. "I'm here, for the board meeting. I believe I'm expected." His confusion was evident, but he checked the visitor system. "Yes, ma'am. You're on the list. Boardroom on 32. The elevator ride gave me a moment to center myself. According to our intelligence, Richard had spent yesterday in a frenzy of activity, calling board members, consulting with lawyers, and issuing thinly veiled threats to executives he suspected of disloyalty. When the doors opened on the executive floor, I was greeted by wide eyes and hushed whispers from staff who clearly hadn't expected to see me again. I walked purposefully toward the boardroom, where Davenport's assistant stood guard. "Ms. Chen," she greeted me professionally, "the board is assembling. Mr. Davenport asked that you wait in his office until he calls for you." "Thank you, Patricia." I followed her to Davenport's private office adjacent to the boardroom, where I could hear voices gradually filling the larger room. Through the connecting door, Richard's agitated tone became audible. "This is completely irregular, Charles. An emergency board meeting with no specific agenda beyond vague governance concerns?" "The agenda will become clear shortly, Richard," Davenport's calm voice replied. "Please take your seat." I focused on my breathing, reviewing my mental script, one final time. Through the door, I could hear Davenport calling the meeting to order, the ritualistic approval of minutes from the previous meeting, then his voice turning serious. "I've called this emergency session to address significant concerns regarding Project Phoenix and overall leadership of Helix Innovations." A pause. "Before we begin, I should note that we have special guests today representing Keating Capital Partners, which has recently taken a significant position in Helix. Richard's voice cut in, sharp with alarm. What position? Why wasn't I informed? Approximately 22% as of market close yesterday, Jensen's measured voice replied. Acquired, through various investment vehicles over the past several months, all properly reported to the SEC. This is outrageous, Richard spluttered. A coordinated attempt to undermine management. Perhaps we should hear the concerns before making judgments, Margaret Chen's voice interjected coolly. The first concern, Davenport continued, involves Project Phoenix, specifically the discrepancy between its reported status and its actual technical viability. I have a demonstration scheduled for tomorrow that will put any concerns to rest, Richard insisted. A demonstration your own development team says will be fabricated, Raj Gupta countered. We've received testimony from 3 senior engineers stating they've been pressured to manipulate test results. A heavy silence fell over the room. Who told you? This is slander. Richard's voice had risen nearly to a shout. The second concern, Davenport pressed on, involves the Meridian acquisition. Independent analysis suggests the accelerated integration timeline places nearly $40 million in value at risk due to technical incompatibilities that haven't been properly addressed. Whoever provided that analysis is working from incomplete information, Richard dismissed. Actually, Davenport replied, they're working from the complete model developed by our former Director of Strategic Development, the same model you presented to this board as your own work. Another heavy silence. I think, Margaret Chen said into the quiet, we should hear directly from the person who developed both that analysis and the original warnings about Phoenix. Charles? This was my cue. I stood, straightening my jacket, and opened the connecting door. The boardroom froze as I entered. 9 board members sat around the massive table, with Davenport at the head. Jensen and Amara occupied visitor chairs along the wall. And Richard, his face flushed with anger and shock, half stood at the far end, mouth literally hanging open. Good morning, I said calmly, walking to the empty chair Davenport indicated beside him. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board. What is she doing here? Richard demanded, finding his voice. This is completely inappropriate. Ms. Chen is here at my invitation, Davenport replied firmly. As chairman, that is my prerogative. She was terminated for cause. She has no place in this room. I was terminated for providing accurate analysis that contradicted your narrative, I corrected, opening my portfolio. Analysis this board deserves to see in its original, unaltered form. For the next 20 minutes, I presented the complete data on both Phoenix and Meridian, the technical failures, the financial implications, the risks and opportunities. I explained how Richard had selectively edited my findings before presenting them as his own, removing critical warnings while taking credit for the positive projections. The demonstration scheduled for tomorrow, I concluded, is an attempt to misrepresent Phoenix's actual status to this board, and, by extension, to shareholders. That constitutes securities fraud. Richard had moved from shock to seething rage. This is a coordinated attack. She's working with Keating to undermine this company. I'm working to save this company, I corrected, from your mismanagement. Ridiculous. I increased quarterly profits by 18% since becoming CEO. Through deferred maintenance, R&D cuts, and financial engineering that created short-term gains at the expense of long-term viability, I countered. Techniques that are now failing, as evidenced by the last quarter's 7% decline. Richard turned to the board members. Are you seriously entertaining this coup attempt from a disgruntled former employee? We're entertaining concerns about your leadership, Margaret Chen replied. Concerns that have only grown with your reaction today. Davenport cleared his throat. I believe we should move to the next item on our agenda. Ms. Chen, would you like to present your alternative vision for Helix? I distributed copies of my strategic plan to each board member. This 5-year roadmap addresses both immediate concerns and long-term growth opportunities. It begins with 3 critical steps. First, immediately halting investment in Phoenix and redirecting those resources to more viable technologies already in our pipeline. Second, returning to the original integration timeline for Meridian, ensuring proper technical compatibility before full system merger. Third, rebuilding our technical teams, starting with rehiring key personnel lost during recent leadership decisions. As the board reviewed the comprehensive plan, Richard made his move. "This is absurd. You have no authority to implement any of this. You don't even work here." "That brings us to our final agenda item," Davenport said gravely. "A vote of no confidence in current leadership and appointment of new executive management." Richard paled visibly. "What?" "Keating Capital Partners, in conjunction with myself and other concerned shareholders representing a majority interest in Helix Innovations, are proposing a leadership change." Davenport looked around the table. "Effective immediately." Richard's attorney, who had been silent until now, leaned forward. "This meeting was called with inadequate notice for such an action." "Delaware corporate law allows for emergency board action when material misrepresentation to shareholders is evidenced," Jensen countered smoothly, "as demonstrated today." You can't?" Richard looked desperately around the table. "I built this company's growth strategy. Without me, Helix will collapse." "You presented growth strategies developed by others as your own," Margaret corrected, "including Ms. Chen's work." "Which you then fired her for defending," Raj Gupta added. Davenport called for order. "I move that we vote on the following. 1. Acceptance of Richard Keller's resignation as CEO, effective immediately. 2. Appointment of Eliza Chen as interim CEO pending formal confirmation." "I second," Margaret Chen said promptly. "All those in favor?" Davenport asked. I held my breath as hands raised around the table. Davenport, Margaret, Raj, Foster. Then, after a moment's hesitation, 2 more directors raised their hands. 6 in favor, 3 opposed, Davenport announced. "The motion carries." Richard stood, abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "All of you." "Security has been instructed to escort you from the building, Richard," Davenport replied calmly. "Your access has already been revoked. You'll receive the details of your separation package from HR." "This isn't over," Richard warned, glaring. Directly at me as security appeared at the boardroom door. "Actually," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily, "it is." As Richard was escorted out, the boardroom remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Davenport turned to me. "Congratulations, Ms. Chen. Or should I say, CEO Chen. The remainder of the meeting passed in a blur of formalities. Interim appointment paperwork, initial authorizations, scheduling of announcements. When it concluded, board members approached to offer congratulations, or in the case of Richard's remaining allies, stiff acknowledgments of the new reality. Davenport walked me to what was now my office, Richard's former space with its expansive views of the river. "He never understood Helix's true potential," the chairman said, looking around the ostentatious space, too focused on appearances rather than substance. "That will change," I promised. "I know." Davenport extended his hand. "Make me proud, Eliza." After he left, I stood alone in the CEO's office, my office, still processing the morning's events. Through the glass walls, I could see staff gathered in small clusters, whispering and glancing in my direction. News was already spreading. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Congratulations, CEO Chen. Boardroom went as planned?" I typed back, "Exactly as planned." Richard escorted out. "Starting work now." Another message arrived, this one from Nate. "Is it true? You're back as CEO?" "It's true," I confirmed. "Meeting with all department heads at 2 p.m. Spread the word." Setting down my phone, I walked to the windows overlooking the city. Somewhere out there, Richard was undoubtedly already plotting some form of revenge. Let him try. I'd just orchestrated the most sophisticated corporate takeover in the company's history, all because he'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating me. The intercom buzzed. Ms. Chen, HR is ready whenever you'd like to review the organizational changes. I smiled. I'll be right there. And please call me Eliza. It was time to rebuild what Richard had nearly destroyed, starting with the people he'd cast aside. After all, the best revenge wasn't just taking his job, it was doing it better than he ever could. News travels fast in corporate environments, but the shockwaves of Richard's removal and my appointment as CEO spread through Helix with unprecedented speed. By the time I finished my meeting with HR, the entire building was buzzing with rumors, speculation, and a palpable sense of uncertainty. My first priority was stabilizing the organization. At precisely 2:00 p.m., I stood before the hastily assembled department heads in the main conference room. Some faces showed relief, others anxiety, and a few, particularly Richard's closest allies, barely concealed hostility. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began, my voice calm and measured. "As you've heard, the board has appointed me interim CEO, effective immediately. I recognize this change is sudden and raises many questions. I intend to answer them directly." For the next 30 minutes, I outlined the immediate path forward. Project Phoenix would be suspended pending comprehensive review. The Meridian acquisition would continue but return to its original timeline, and an all-hands meeting would be scheduled for tomorrow morning to address the entire company. "I'll be meeting with each of you individually over the next 3 days," I concluded. "Until then, please reassure your teams that their jobs are secure. The only changes coming will strengthen Helix, not diminish it." As the meeting dispersed, I asked Nate and Harrison Palmer, Richard's yes man who had taken over my projects, to remain behind. "Harrison," I began once the room had cleared, "I'm reassigning you effective immediately." His face tightened. "You can't just—" "I can and I am," I replied evenly. "You'll be returning to market analysis, where your skills are better suited. Nate will resume leadership of the Meridian integration team." "This is because I'm loyal to Richard," he accused. "This is because the Meridian integration is failing under your management, putting a $40 million acquisition at risk," I corrected. "Your loyalty is your business. Your performance is mine." After Harrison stormed out, Nate finally allowed himself a smile. That was satisfying to watch. "How bad is it, really?" I asked, turning to the practical matters at hand. "Meridian?" "Worse than I reported. Harrison." The rest of the afternoon passed in a flurry of meetings, decisions, and critical conversations. I met with the CFO to review our true financial position, discovering several concerning gaps between reported numbers and actual performance. I spoke with legal about Richard's departure terms and potential fallout. I reviewed the executive team structure, identifying immediate changes needed. By evening, I had a clearer picture of the challenges ahead. Richard had left Helix in worse condition than even I had suspected, prioritizing appearance over substance throughout the organization. The culture had deteriorated, with fear rather than innovation driving decisions. Key talent had departed, taking valuable institutional knowledge with them. But I also saw tremendous potential waiting to be unleashed. Projects languishing under Richard's leadership could be revitalized, teams demoralized by his management. Style could be re-inspired. The company's core strengths remained solid, merely obscured by poor leadership. As the office emptied for the night, I remained at my desk, preparing for the next day's all-hands meeting. This would be my first opportunity to address the entire company as CEO, a critical moment for setting tone and direction. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "How's day one as corporate overlord?" I smiled despite my exhaustion. Discovering new problems hourly. Richard left bigger mess than expected. Need reinforcements? He replied. Not yet. Getting clear picture first. We'll update tomorrow. After sending the message, I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a moment to absorb the day's events. 3 weeks ago, I'd walked out of this building, career seemingly in shambles. Now I sat in the CEO's office, with the authority to reshape the company according to my vision. The sweet satisfaction was tempered by the enormous responsibility. Over 700 employees now look to me for leadership and security. Shareholders expected recovery and growth. Customers needed reliability and innovation. My contemplation was interrupted by a knock at the door. I looked up to see Darcy from marketing, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. Sorry to bother you, Eliza. Miss Chen. Eliza is fine, Darcy. What can I do for you? She stepped inside, clutching a folder. I have something you should see. I didn't want to bring it up in a larger meeting. My interest piqued, I gestured, for her to continue. After Richard fired you, I was assigned to prepare the Phoenix marketing materials for the public announcement planned next month. She placed the folder on my desk. These are the projections Richard provided us. They don't match anything the development team was reporting internally. I opened the folder to find market projections, customer adoption rates, and revenue forecasts for Phoenix, all wildly inflated beyond any reasonable expectation. He was planning to announce Phoenix as market-ready on November 15th, Darcy continued. With these projected figures, despite the development team telling him repeatedly the technology wasn't viable, I scanned the documents with growing concern. He provided these numbers officially, in writing? Yes, signed off on them himself last week. This wasn't just mismanagement, it was deliberate misrepresentation to the market. Had Richard gone through with this announcement, he would have committed clear securities fraud. Thank you, Darcy. This is extremely important information. I met her eyes. Why are you bringing this to me directly? She hesitated before answering. Because Richard fired my sister from her tech job at Westlake Systems last year. Same pattern. She questioned a project's viability. He pushed her out during a consultation. He has a history of this. The connection clicked immediately. Westlake Systems had been Richard's previous employer before joining Helix. He'd portrayed his departure as a strategic career move, but perhaps there was more to that story. I'd like to speak with your sister if she's willing, I said, adding another piece to my mental puzzle of Richard's past behavior. After Darcy left, I made 2 phone calls, one to our general counsel regarding the Phoenix marketing materials, and another to Jensen at KCP requesting a deeper background investigation into Richard's tenure at Westlake Systems. By the time I finally left the office at 10 p.m., I had a clearer understanding of both the challenges ahead and the extent of Richard's misdeeds. Tomorrow would be about steadying the ship and beginning the rebuilding process. The all-hands meeting the next morning filled our largest gathering space to capacity, with remote employees joining via video conference. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me as I took the stage, the room silent with anticipation. Good morning, I began, deliberately eschewing PowerPoint or prepared notes. Most of you know me as Eliza Chen, former Director of Strategic Development. Today, I speak to you as Helix's CEO. I recognize the suddenness of this change raises questions and concerns, which I intend to address directly. For the next 30 minutes, I laid out the situation with transparency rarely seen in corporate communications. I explained the board's decision without demonizing Richard, outlined the immediate changes being implemented, and provided honest assessment of our challenges and opportunities. I won't sugarcoat the reality, I continued. We have serious work ahead to correct our course. Project Phoenix has been suspended because the technology simply isn't viable despite significant investment. The Meridian acquisition remains tremendous opportunity but requires careful integration rather than arbitrary acceleration. And most importantly, we need to rebuild a culture where innovation thrives and truth is valued over convenient narratives. I could see the tension visibly easing throughout the room as people realized this wouldn't be another exercise in corporate doublespeak. In the coming weeks, we'll be making necessary changes to strengthen Helix for the long term. This will include restructuring certain departments, revisiting our project portfolio, and yes, bringing back key talent that left under previous leadership. I paused, making eye contact with different sections of the audience. What it will not include is mass layoffs, office closures, or abandonment of our core mission. The Q&A session that followed was remarkably candid. I answered every question directly, acknowledging when I didn't yet have complete information. By the session's end, the atmosphere had transformed from anxiety to cautious optimism. As people filed out, many stopped to offer congratulations or express relief at the leadership change. More tellingly, several approached with ideas they'd been hesitant to share under Richard's management, innovations potentially valuable to Helix's future. Back in my office, I found Michael waiting, casually reviewing reports at my conference. "Table. Impressive address," he remarked, "particularly the honesty about Phoenix." "Transparency now prevents bigger problems later," I replied, joining him at the table. "Any findings on Richard's Westlake history?" "Preliminary, but interesting." Michael slid a folder across to me. He departed under similar circumstances, questioned technology investments, strained board relationships, exodus of technical talent. They paid him generously to leave quietly, which he portrayed as a lucrative recruitment by Helix, I noted, scanning the documents. Exactly. Also, worth noting, Michael was interrupted by an urgent knock. My assistant appeared, looking uncharacteristically flustered. "Ms. Chen, I'm sorry to interrupt, but security called. Richard is downstairs demanding entry. He's causing quite a scene." I exchanged glances with Michael. "Tell security I'll be right down." Sometimes the past doesn't go quietly, especially when that past has a wounded ego and misplaced sense of entitlement. It seemed Richard wasn't finished with Helix, or with me. The lobby of Helix headquarters had transformed into an impromptu theater, with employees gathering along the mezzanine and behind glass partitions to witness the unfolding drama. At the center stood Richard, his normally impeccable appearance noticeably disheveled, tie askew, hair uncombed, eyes wild with a dangerous mixture of humiliation and rage. "I demand to speak to the board," he was shouting at Marcus and two other security guards who blocked his path to the elevators. "This hostile takeover is illegal!" I stepped off the elevator, Michael trailing discreetly behind me. The lobby fell silent as I approached, employees wide-eyed at seeing their former and current CEOs about to collide. "Richard," I greeted him, calmly. "This isn't appropriate." He spun toward me, face flushing darker. You engineered this entire thing. Sabotaged Phoenix, undermined me to the board, collaborated with outsiders to steal my company." "The board made its decision based on evidence of mismanagement," I replied, keeping my voice leveled despite the spectacle. "This isn't the place for this discussion." "Where is the place? Your office?" "My office?" He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. "You think you've won, don't you? Little Eliza Chen, always the smartest in the room, always convinced she knows better than everyone else." I maintained eye contact, refusing to be intimidated. "If you'd like to discuss transition matters professionally, my assistant can schedule time. Otherwise, I need to ask you to leave." "I built this company." His voice rose again, echoing through the lobby. 5 years of my life, transforming Helix from a struggling tech shop to an industry leader, and you destroy it all because your feelings got hurt when I fired you? You didn't build Helix, Richard. You inherited a strong foundation and harvested short-term gains at the expense of long-term viability. I gestured subtly to Marcus, who moved closer. "Your personal belongings will be packed and delivered to your home. Your separation agreement. is being prepared by legal. There's nothing to be gained by continuing this scene. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. You want to talk about scenes? How about I call a press conference? Share some interesting insights about how Keating Capital Partners coordinated with a disgruntled ex-employee to seize control of a publicly traded company? Michael stepped forward. That would be inadvisable, Richard. The evidence of your mismanagement and misrepresentation to shareholders is substantial. Further public statements could complicate your legal position considerably. Richard's gaze shifted between us, calculation replacing some of the raw emotion. This isn't over, he finally said, straightening his jacket. Not even close. It is for today, I replied firmly. Marcus will escort you out. As security led him toward the exit, Richard turned back. You think you're so clever, Eliza. But remember, I know where all the bodies are buried. I know this company's weaknesses better than anyone. And I still have friends here. The threat hung in the air as the doors closed behind him. Gradually, the audience of employees dispersed, returning to their duties with fresh fodder for speculation and gossip. That was concerning, Michael noted as we returned to the elevator. His mention of friends here suggests he might have planted loyalists. Already on it, I replied. I've asked IT to audit system access and communications, focusing on sensitive projects and financial data. We're also accelerating our leadership assessments to identify potential problems. Back in my office, we found Jensen waiting with an update on our investigation into Richard's tenure at Westlake Systems. It's worse than we thought, he reported, spreading documents across the conference table. Richard left Westlake under a confidential separation agreement after their board discovered he had been manipulating project timelines and financial projections to boost his performance bonuses. I scanned the heavily redacted documents. How did he land the COO position at Helix afterward? The agreement included strict non-disparagement clauses. Westlake couldn't warn Helix without risking litigation. Plus, he had a friend on Helix's board at the time, Victor Lansing. The same Victor Lansing who now owns the supplier developing Phoenix's technology, Michael noted. The connection deepens. And who's currently trying to acquire Helix, I added, the pieces connecting. This wasn't just about Richard's ego or Phoenix. There's a larger play here involving Lansing. Our conversation was interrupted by an urgent call from IT security. I put it on speaker. Ms. Chen, we've detected unusual activity in our server logs, reported Andre, our head of cybersecurity. Someone with executive credentials accessed and downloaded sensitive files at 3 a.m. last night. Phoenix documentation, Meridian integration plans, and financial forecasts. My stomach tightened. Whose credentials? That's the concerning part. They appear to be Richard's, but his access should have been revoked yesterday morning with his termination. He found a backdoor, I concluded, or had one prepared in advance. Worse, Andre continued. We've found evidence his personal laptop had a persistent connection to our systems for months, bypassing normal security protocols. It was disguised as an automated system backup. I exchanged glances with Michael and Jensen. Lock down all sensitive systems immediately. Change every password, encryption key, and access protocol. And I want a complete security audit by end of day. After ending the call, I leaned back, processing the implications. Richard's taking corporate data. The question is, what does he plan to do with it? Leverage for a better separation package? Jensen suggested. Ammunition for a wrongful termination suit? Michael offered. Or delivering it to Lansing to help with his acquisition attempt, I concluded grimly. We need to accelerate our countermeasures. Jensen, brief our outside counsel on potential legal actions against both Richard and Lansing. Michael, let's move up our meetings with major shareholders to secure their continued support. The next 48 hours became a high-stakes chess match played across multiple boards simultaneously. While I worked to stabilize Helix's operations and reassure key clients, our legal team documented Richard's misconduct and security breaches. Michael's firm increased their protective position in Helix's stock, blocking several attempted purchases that appeared linked to Lansing's holdings. By Sunday evening, we had uncovered Richard's apparent strategy. An anonymous email to Davenport from a self-described concerned employee revealed that Richard and Lansing had been coordinating for months. The plan: Richard would push Phoenix despite knowing the technology wasn't viable, driving Helix's resources toward Lansing's supplier company. When the inevitable failures occurred, Helix's stock would plummet, allowing Lansing to acquire the company at a fraction of its value, with Richard returning triumphantly as president of the new subsidiary. My firing had accelerated their timeline, but not changed the fundamental strategy. Now Richard was feeding Lansing confidential information to support a hostile takeover attempt. "We need to go public with this," I told the emergency executive team assembled in my office Sunday night. "Transparently address the Phoenix failure, Richard's misconduct, and our path forward." "That's risky," our chief marketing officer cautioned. "Admitting technology failure could tank our stock." "Hiding it would be worse," I countered. "When it eventually comes out, and it will, we'll have sacrificed credibility along with market cap." After hours of debate, we crafted our strategy. A Monday morning press release detailing the leadership change, suspension of Project Phoenix pending review, and reaffirmation of our commitment to the Meridian acquisition under a more realistic timeline. We would acknowledge irregularities discovered in previous management's reporting, but emphasize the core strength of Helix's business and technology portfolio. I spent Sunday night in my office, preparing for what would inevitably be a turbulent market reaction. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've made a serious mistake, Eliza. I'm giving you one chance to resign before the market opens tomorrow. Otherwise, what happens to Helix is on your head. Richard." Obviously. I forwarded the message to legal to document the implied threat, then returned to my preparations without replying. Monday morning arrived with the expected media storm. Business. Networks ran breathless headlines about the boardroom coup at Helix Innovations. Technology blogs speculated about Project Phoenix's sudden suspension. Financial analysts debated the implications for shareholders. Our stock dropped 12% at the opening bell, painful but within our projected scenarios. I spent the morning on back-to-back calls with major investors, transparently outlining our situation and recovery strategy. By afternoon, the selling pressure had eased somewhat as the market digested our plans. Then came Richard's countermove. At 2:30 p.m., he appeared on BizNow, a leading financial news program, identified as former CEO of Helix Innovations. For 15 excruciating minutes, he painted himself as the victim of a calculated takeover by venture capital vultures and a vindictive former employee with a personal grudge. He claimed Phoenix was on the verge of a breakthrough before my sabotage, accused me of misleading the board about the Meridian acquisition to advance my personal agenda, and suggested Keating Capital Partners had violated securities regulations in their accumulation of Helix shares. The market reacted immediately, with our stock sliding another 8% before trading was temporarily halted due to volatility. "We need to respond," our head of investor relations insisted as we watched the interview replay in my office. "This narrative is deadly if left unchallenged." I nodded, already formulating our counterattack. "Schedule a press conference for 4 p.m. We'll address every allegation directly with evidence. And reach out to BizNow. I want equal time to respond." As my team scrambled to prepare, I received another call from IT security. "Ms. Chen, we've traced the source of last night's system breach," Andre reported. "It wasn't Richard's laptop. The access came from inside Helix, specifically from Harrison Palmer's workstation. So Richard's mole had revealed himself. Lockie, down his access immediately and have security escort him from the building. Preserve all evidence for potential criminal charges." The revelation confirmed my suspicion that Richard had planted loyalists throughout the organization. The question was, how many more remained hidden, waiting to undermine our recovery efforts? As 4 p.m. approached, I stood before the assembled press corps, cameras broadcasting live to financial networks worldwide. The future of Helix and my leadership would hinge on the next 30 minutes. Richard had fired his best shot. Now it was my turn. Good afternoon. I'm Eliza Chen, CEO of Helix Innovations. Thank you for joining us on short notice. The press room buzzed with energy as cameras focused on me. Behind the podium, I projected calm confidence despite the crisis unfolding around us. Nate stood to my right with technical documentation, our general counsel to my left with legal folders. Earlier today, former CEO Richard Keller made several allegations regarding the circumstances of his departure and Helix's current status. I'm here to address those claims directly with facts and evidence. I signaled to our media team, who displayed the first slide, a timeline of Project Phoenix's development alongside its actual test results. Mr. Keller claimed Project Phoenix was on the verge of breakthrough. These are the actual technical assessments conducted by our engineering team over the past 6 months. I gestured to the declining performance metrics. As you can see, despite significant investment, the core technology has consistently failed to meet even minimum viability thresholds. Cameras flashed as journalists scribbled notes. I continued methodically, contrasting Richard's claims with documented evidence, explaining the technical challenges Phoenix faced without unnecessary jargon. Mr. Keller suggested I sabotaged Phoenix. The reality is simpler. The technology doesn't work. Instead of acknowledging this fact, previous management continued to divert resources to a failing project while misrepresenting its status to the board and shareholders. I moved to the next topic. Regarding the Meridian acquisition, Mr. Keller claimed I misled the board. In fact, the integration strategy he presented as his own work was developed by my team. I nodded to Nate, who distributed packets to the front row reporters. These documents show the original analysis with my signature from March, alongside Mr. Keller's nearly identical presentation to the board in July. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal raised her hand. Ms. Chen, what? About allegations that Keating Capital Partners violated securities regulations in accumulating Helix shares. All of KCP's acquisitions were conducted in full compliance with SEC regulations, with appropriate disclosures filed at each threshold, I replied. Our general counsel has prepared a complete summary of those transactions, which we're making available to you today. For 30 minutes, I systematically dismantled each of Richard's accusations, presenting evidence rather than engaging in personal attacks. As the press conference concluded, I delivered the final message we had carefully crafted. Helix Innovations is facing challenges, as I've transparently acknowledged. But these challenges stem from poor management decisions and misallocated resources, not from the fundamental strength of our business or technology portfolio. We're taking immediate corrective action, redirecting investment to viable projects, properly executing the Meridian integration, and rebuilding our culture of innovation. I'm confident that within 2 quarters, you'll see the results of these changes reflected in our performance. The financial networks carried the press conference live, with commentators noting the stark contrast between Richard's emotional accusations and my evidence-based rebuttal. By market close, our stock had recovered half its daily losses. Not a complete victory, but a significant improvement from the freefall triggered by Richard's interview. Back in my office, Michael watched the market reaction on his tablet. Well played. The transparency about Phoenix was risky, but it's differentiating you from Richard's management style. Transparency was our only option, I replied, reviewing the initial media coverage. Richard's claiming I'm driven by personal vendetta. Addressing the issues factually undermines that narrative. Jensen entered with a security update. Harrison Palmer is being questioned by our legal team, Initial findings suggest he's been feeding information to Richard for at least 2 weeks, not just yesterday. We're conducting a comprehensive sweep for other potential moles. What about system security? I asked. IT has locked down all critical systems and implemented enhanced monitoring. The immediate vulnerability has been addressed. I nodded, turning to Michael. And Lansing's acquisition attempt? Our defensive positions are holding for now. He's approached 2 institutional investors about acquiring their shares, but they're waiting to see how this plays out. Michael scrolled through his notes. However, there's a new development. Lansing has scheduled a private dinner with Davenport tomorrow night. That was concerning. Despite supporting my appointment, Davenport remained a significant shareholder. Who could be influenced? I need to speak with Davenport before that meeting, I decided. Set it up for tomorrow morning if possible. As Michael made the arrangements, my assistant appeared with an urgent message. Ms. Chen, the Phoenix development team has requested an immediate meeting. They say it's critical. 20 minutes later, I sat with the core technical team who had been working on Phoenix for over a year. Their lead engineer, Ava Rodriguez, looked simultaneously exhausted and animated. We've been conducting a forensic analysis of Phoenix's development history since you suspended the project, she explained, spreading technical diagrams across the conference table. Something didn't add up in the test failures, so we went back to the original specifications. What did you find? I asked, noting the team's unusual energy given their project's cancellation. The technology isn't failing. Ava pointed to specific components in the design. It's been deliberately sabotaged. These modifications were introduced 6 months ago, after our initial prototype showed promising results. They ensure the system will always fail under test conditions. I leaned forward, pulse quickening. You're saying Phoenix actually works? The original design does. We've constructed a clean room prototype based on the original specifications, without the sabotaged elements. Ava's eyes gleamed with vindication. We completed testing an hour ago. It works exactly as originally projected. Who made these modifications? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. The change orders came directly from Richard, supposedly reflecting optimizations from Lansing's supplier company. Ava shook her head in disgust. They're not optimizations. They're poison pills designed to make the project fail after consuming maximum resources. The implications were staggering. Richard hadn't just been incompetent, he'd been deliberately sabotaging Helix's most promising technology, likely to drive down the company's value for Lansing's acquisition. I need this documented comprehensively, I told the team. Every change order, every test result, every communication with Richard and Lansing's company. Complete technical analysis showing how these modifications guaranteed failure. As they left to compile the evidence, I called Michael and Jensen back to my office, explaining the shocking discovery. This changes everything, Michael noted, pacing by the windows. Richard and Lansing weren't just opportunistically taking advantage of a failed project. They engineered its failure. Industrial sabotage, Jensen added, already considering the legal angles. Potentially criminal conspiracy if we can prove Richard's intent. We need to move carefully, I cautioned. First, secure the working prototype and all documentation. Second, brief keyboard members before Lansing can get to them. Third, prepare for potential legal action against both Richard and Lansing. The rest of the evening was spent executing this plan, with security measures enhanced around the Phoenix team and their critical proof. By midnight, we had briefed Davenport and 3 other directors, all of whom expressed shock at the apparent conspiracy. I finally left the office around 1 a.m., returning to my apartment for the first time in nearly 2 days. As I stepped out of the elevator into my building's quiet hallway, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something felt wrong. The door to my apartment was slightly ajar. I froze, then backed away silently, calling building security and then Michael. Within 20 minutes, security had confirmed that someone had indeed broken into my apartment, rifling through my home office before apparently being scared off by a neighbor's return. "This is escalating beyond corporate warfare," Michael said grimly as we stood in the hallway while police documented the scene. "Richard's getting desperate." I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the past days. "Have security sweep my office at Helix first thing tomorrow, and arrange a temporary place for me to stay that's not in my name." "Already on it," he assured me. "We should also consider personal security for you until this resolves." Though the suggestion felt extreme, the broken door and ransacked office suggested otherwise. "Arrange it," I agreed. "But discreetly. I don't want to project fear to the organization." Despite the late-night intrusion, I arrived at Helix early the next morning for my meeting with Davenport. He was already waiting in the boardroom, studying the Phoenix sabotage evidence we'd provided last night. "Troubling doesn't begin to describe this," he said, looking up as I entered. "I've known Richard for years. I never imagined he'd stoop to actual sabotage." "People reveal themselves under pressure," I replied, taking a seat across from him. "I understand you're meeting with Victor Lansing tonight." Davenport nodded, unperturbed by my knowledge of his schedule. "He requested the meeting. Given these developments, I'm considering canceling." "I'd suggest keeping it," I countered, "but wearing a recording device provided by our legal team. If Lansing is part of this conspiracy, he might reveal something useful." The chairman considered this, then nodded slowly. "Reasonable precaution. Though it feels rather cloak and dagger for a man my age." "These aren't normal circumstances," I noted. "Richard broke into my apartment last night." Davenport's eyebrows shot up. "That's crossed a line from business to personal." I believe the line blurred for Richard the moment I was appointed to replace him. I leaned forward, addressing the unspoken question. "Which is why I want to assure you that my decisions are driven by what's best for Helix, not personal vendetta." "Your actions have demonstrated that," Davenport replied. "The transparency about Phoenix, before you knew it had been sabotaged, showed integrity. Richard would have buried the failure and found someone to blame." Our conversation was interrupted by an urgent message. Richard had just appeared on another financial news program, this time with Victor Lansing at his side. They were announcing a strategic partnership to rescue Helix from its current mismanagement. As we watched the interview, Lansing outlined his proposal. A tender offer for Helix shares at a 15% premium to yesterday's closing price, with Richard returning as division president. "A hostile takeover," Davenport observed. "Time to capitalize on yesterday's stock drop." I was already texting Michael and our executive team, calling an emergency response meeting. Lansing's moving faster than we anticipated, but he doesn't know what we discovered about Phoenix. Davenport's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Perhaps it's time to spring the trap on both of them." I smiled, despite the crisis unfolding. "My thoughts? Exactly." Richard's frontal assault had just handed us the perfect opportunity for a decisive counterattack. The executive boardroom hummed with tense energy as our crisis team assembled. On wall monitors, financial networks continued to replay Lansing and Richard's announcement, with analysts debating the implications of the hostile takeover attempt. Our stock had jumped 7% on the news of the tender offer, not surprising given the 15% premium Lansing was offering. "They're moving aggressively," Michael observed as the team settled. "Lansing's already filed with the SEC. They're contacting major shareholders directly with a 48-hour decision window to create pressure." "It's a classic shock and awe approach," Jensen added. "They're betting shareholders will grab the premium without questioning the long-term strategy." I stood at the head of the table, surveying our assembled team. "Let's be clear about what's happening. Richard deliberately sabotaged Phoenix to devalue Helix, making it vulnerable to Lansing's acquisition. Now they're attempting to capitalize on the damage they themselves caused." "The good news," Nate interjected, "is that we have documented proof of the sabotage." The Phoenix team worked through the night preparing a comprehensive technical analysis. He distributed tablets containing the evidence, side-by-side comparisons of the original specifications versus Richard's optimized versions, test results from both designs, and a video demonstration of the working prototype developed from the original specs. The performance difference is remarkable, our CTO commented, studying the data. The original design achieves 92% of projected benchmarks. Richard's version never exceeds 34%. And we have the paper trail proving Richard specifically ordered these changes, Ava Rodriguez added, joining us from the Phoenix team. Including direct communications with Lansing's supplier company about the so-called optimizations. Our general counsel looked up from his review. This is textbook corporate sabotage. We have grounds for criminal charges against both Richard and potentially Lansing, depending on what he knew and when. What about the tender offer? Our CFO asked. 15% premium is significant. Many shareholders will be tempted, especially after the recent volatility. Which is precisely why we need to move quickly, I replied. Here's my proposed strategy. First, we immediately announce the Phoenix breakthrough based on the original design, complete with technical validation and market potential. Second, we file for emergency injunctive relief against Richard and Lansing based on the sabotage evidence. Third, we call an emergency shareholder meeting to present the full situation before they can complete their tender offer. Michael nodded approval. Hit them with the truth before they can close their trap. Exactly. And fourth, I continued, we need to reach out personally to our top 20 shareholders before Lansing does. They need to understand that accepting a short-term premium means missing out on Phoenix's actual long-term value. For the next hour, we refined the plan, assigning responsibilities and defining messaging. Legal would prepare the injunction filing while communications crafted our announcements. Investor relations would handle shareholder outreach while the Phoenix team prepared a public demonstration of the working technology. As the meeting concluded, my assistant entered with an envelope that had just been delivered by courier. I opened it to find a formal letter from Richard's attorney demanding I retract my defamatory statements from yesterday's press conference and threatening litigation. Predictable, Jensen commented, reviewing the letter. He's trying to intimidate you while distracting our legal team. File it with the evidence, I replied. It shows pattern and intent. 15 minutes later, our counteroffensive began with a press release announcing the Phoenix breakthrough, describing the technology's successful testing and significant market potential. We deliberately omitted any mention of the sabotage for, now, focusing purely on the positive technological development. The stock market reacted immediately. Trading in Helix shares spiked, with our price climbing rapidly as investors reassessed the company's value in light of the Phoenix news. Within an hour, our shares had risen 12%, effectively negating Lansing's premium offer. Next came the legal action. Our attorneys filed for an emergency injunction against Lansing's tender offer, citing evidence of corporate sabotage and securities fraud. The filing included detailed technical documentation of the deliberate modifications to Phoenix, communication, records between Richard and Lansing's company, and financial analyses showing how the sabotage had artificially depressed Helix's value. By mid-afternoon, the business media landscape had transformed. Headlines about Lansing's takeover bid were replaced with breaking news about the Phoenix breakthrough and rumors of our serious allegations against the former CEO. Financial analysts who had been questioning my leadership that morning were now praising the apparent resurrection of Helix's flagship technology. Richard and Lansing countered predictably, issuing statements dismissing our claims as desperate fabrications and last-ditch efforts to maintain control. But their position was weakening by the hour as our evidence began circulating among major shareholders and board members. The decisive moment came at 4 p.m. when Judge Eleanor Martinez granted our request for a temporary restraining order blocking Lansing's tender offer pending a full hearing on our allegations. The order cited substantial evidence suggesting improper conduct and potential irreparable harm to shareholders if the acquisition proceeded without full disclosure of the facts. As markets closed, Helix stock had risen 18%, now trading above Lansing's offer price. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but the battle was far from over. "Excellent first day," Michael commented as we regrouped in my office. "But Richard and Lansing won't surrender easily." "Agreed," I replied, reviewing the latest analyst reports. "They'll regroup and try a different angle. We need to prepare for their next move." That move came sooner than expected. Shortly after 7 p.m., Darcy from marketing rushed into my office, tablet in hand. "You need to see this," she said urgently, pulling up an article from Tech Insider, a prominent industry blog. The headline sent ice through my veins. "Exclusive: Helix CEO accused of intellectual property theft by former employer." The article cited anonymous sources, claiming I had stolen proprietary technology from my previous employer, Axiom Systems, and implemented it at Helix. The piece included vague descriptions of supposedly stolen intellectual property and suggestions that my meteoric rise at Helix had been fueled by these purloined innovations. "Richard," I said quietly, recognizing his handiwork. "This is why he broke into my apartment, looking for something to support these allegations." "It's completely fabricated," Darcy insisted. "Everyone knows your reputation for integrity. Facts won't stop this from doing damage," Michael warned, already checking market reactions in after-hours trading. "Perception is everything, especially with the acquisition battle ongoing." He was right. Our stock had already dropped 4% in by after-hours trading, and the story was being picked up by other tech publications. "We need to respond immediately," our communications director urged, joining us after seeing the article. "Forceful denial, threat of legal action against the publisher, the works." I considered our options carefully. "No, that's exactly what Richard wants, to drag us into a public mud-fighting contest that distracts from his sabotage and gives Lansing time to regroup." "So what's your plan?" Michael asked, intrigued. "Three-pronged approach," I replied, already typing notes. "First, a simple, factual statement denying the allegations and noting the suspicious timing given our sabotage evidence. Second, accelerate the Phoenix public demonstration to tomorrow morning instead of next week. And third, I looked up with determination. I'm going to call my former CEO at Axiom Systems tonight." The room went quiet. "Richard won't expect that," I explained. "He's counting on a defensive response that keeps us busy for days. Instead, I'll get Stephen Black from Axiom to issue a statement confirming my departure was exemplary and no IP concerns exist." "Will he do it?" Jensen asked. "Absolutely. We've maintained good relations, and he despises corporate character assassination. Plus, the implication that Axiom couldn't protect its own IP will irritate him enough to respond forcefully." Within the hour, our communications team had issued our measured denial, and I had reached Stephen Black at his home. His reaction to the allegations was precisely as I'd predicted, indignation followed by immediate support. "This is outrageous, Eliza," he fumed over the speakerphone. "I'll have our legal department draft a statement tonight affirming you left Axiom with our highest recommendation and never had any intellectual property issues whatsoever." "Thank you, Stephen. I apologize for the implication that Axiom's security could be so easily compromised." "That's what really galls me," he admitted. "The suggestion that we wouldn't notice someone walking out with our proprietary technology will make it crystal clear that these allegations are completely unfounded." By morning, Axiom's forceful statement had been released, completely undermining the Tech Insider article. The publication, facing potential legal action from both Helix and Axiom, quickly added significant updates to the piece, essentially retracting the most damaging claims. Meanwhile, our Phoenix demonstration had been hastily arranged in Helix's main auditorium. Technology journalists, financial analysts, and key shareholders gathered to witness the supposedly failed technology performing exactly as originally promised. Eva Rodriguez led the presentation, methodically demonstrating each capability while explaining how the original design had been compromised by unauthorized optimizations. The evidence was irrefutable. Side-by-side testing showed the stark performance difference between the original design and Richard's sabotaged version. Communication records displayed on giant screens revealed the deliberate nature of the modifications. By noon, the narrative had completely shifted. Headlines now focused on the apparent corporate sabotage and potential securities fraud. Richard and Lansing's credibility was crumbling as analysts questioned the ethics and legality of their acquisition attempt. Our stock closed up 22%, with trading volume at record levels. Lansing's tender offer, already legally suspended, was now economically non-viable as our shares traded well above his proposed price. That evening, as I reviewed the day's developments with Michael and Jensen, my assistant forwarded an email that had just arrived from Richard's personal account, Eliza. This vendetta has gone far enough. You've made your point. I'm prepared to discuss a reasonable resolution that allows all parties to save face. Name your terms. Richard. He's looking for an exit, Jensen observed. The sabotage evidence has him cornered legally. And Lansing is probably reconsidering their partnership, Michael added. Richard's becoming a liability rather than an asset. I stared at the message, thinking about Richard's smug dismissal when he fired me, his casual cruelty, his willingness to damage an entire company and hundreds of careers for his personal gain. Should I draft a response? My assistant asked. No need, I replied, closing the email. Some messages don't deserve a reply. Richard had fired me without cause, thinking I would simply disappear. Instead, I had returned stronger, reclaimed the company he tried to destroy, and exposed his corruption. No negotiation was necessary. Justice was already being served. The trap had sprung perfectly, and Richard had no one to blame but himself. The next 72 hours brought seismic shifts in the battle for Helix's future. By Thursday morning, Lansing had withdrawn his tender offer, issuing a terse statement claiming, "Market conditions no longer support the proposed transaction." The real reason was obvious. Our stock had continued climbing as the Phoenix breakthrough generated excitement, now trading 34% above his original offer price. Richard, meanwhile, had gone conspicuously silent after his unanswered email. No more media appearances, no public statements, no further legal threats. His sudden disappearance from the battlefield only increased speculation about his role in the Phoenix sabotage. Lansing's cutting him loose, Michael observed during our morning strategy meeting. Latest intelligence suggests they've ceased all communication. Richard has become radioactive. Unsurprising, Jensen commented. Lansing can claim ignorance of the sabotage and salvage his reputation. Richard doesn't have that luxury. I reviewed the latest developments on my tablet. Our emergency injunction had been extended by the court pending a full hearing. 3 major shareholders who had initially expressed interest in Lansing's offer had publicly reaffirmed their commitment to Helix under current management. And most significantly, the SEC had opened a formal investigation into Richard's actions based on the evidence we'd provided. "What's our next move?" Nate asked, looking around the conference table where our core team had gathered. "We cement our victory," I replied, "not just against Richard and Lansing, but for Helix's future. That means 3 priorities. First, accelerate Phoenix development based on the original functional design. Second, properly execute the Meridian integration with realistic timelines. And third, rebuild our organizational culture around innovation and integrity." The Phoenix team was already energized, working around the clock to recapture momentum lost during Richard's sabotage. Eva Rodriguez had been promoted to lead the division, with a mandate to bring the technology to market within 9 months. Nate's Meridian integration was back on track, following the careful approach I'd originally designed rather than Richard's reckless acceleration. But the cultural rebuild would take longer. Years of Richard's leadership had created pockets of toxicity, fear-based decision-making, and misaligned incentives throughout the organization. Addressing these issues would require systematic changes in everything from performance metrics to communication practices. We should also consider the remaining Richard loyalists, our HR director suggested. Harrison wasn't the only one, just the most obvious. Agreed, but we need to be careful, I cautioned. This isn't about purging people with personal connections to Richard. It's about identifying those who participated in mismanagement or sabotage. As the meeting concluded, my assistant appeared with news that made the room go silent. The FBI had just arrived in the lobby, requesting to speak with me regarding evidence of corporate espionage and wire fraud. It's beginning, Jensen said, quietly as the team exchanged glances. The criminal phase. I straightened my jacket. Have them escorted to the small conference room. Jensen, you'll join me. Everyone else, continue with your assignments. This was always a possible development. Once we submitted our evidence. The two FBI agents, Special Agents Collins and Rivera, were professionally cordial but direct. They had reviewed our filings in the injunction case and wanted to discuss the evidence of deliberate sabotage, particularly the communications between Richard and Lansing's supplier company. We understand you have documentation showing Mr. Keller specifically ordered technical modifications that he knew would cause the project to fail, Agent Collins asked, notebook open before him. Correct, I confirmed, as Jensen provided a folder containing the key evidence. The technical analysis conclusively demonstrates that these weren't optimizations but deliberate sabotage. The original design functions as intended, only the modified version fails. And these modifications served what purpose, in your assessment? Agent Rivera inquired. To devalue Helix by making our flagship technology project appear non-viable, facilitating an acquisition by Victor Lansing's company at a depressed price, I explained. Mr. Keller stood to benefit personally as he had a promised position in the post-acquisition structure. The agents reviewed the documentation carefully, asking detailed questions about timelines, communication patterns, and financial implications. After nearly 2 hours, they thanked us for our cooperation and indicated they would be contacting Richard and Lansing for questioning. This will escalate quickly, Jensen predicted after they departed. The evidence is compelling and wire fraud. Charges carry significant penalties. I nodded, feeling a complex mixture of vindication and somber responsibility. Make sure our legal team is prepared for the increased scrutiny this will bring. The last thing we need is to have our recovery derailed by a prolonged criminal investigation. As we returned to the executive floor, we found Michael waiting with breaking news. Lansing had issued a statement distancing himself completely from Richard, claiming he had been misled about Phoenix's viability and had no knowledge of any technology sabotage. The rats are fleeing the sinking ship, Michael remarked, showing me the statement on his phone. Lansing's throwing Richard overboard to save himself. Before I could respond, my assistant hurried over. Ms. Chen, there's a situation developing. Richard just entered the building. What? How? I demanded, immediately concerned about security. He apparently still had an old badge that worked on the exterior doors. Security is tracking him, but he's already on this floor. As if on cue, we heard a commotion from the direction of the executive offices. Rounding the corner, we found Richard being physically restrained by 2 security guards outside my office door. His appearance was shocking, unshaven, hair disheveled, clothing wrinkled, eyes wild with a dangerous combination of desperation and rage. You ruined everything, he shouted when he saw me. Everything I built, 10 years of my career destroyed because you couldn't accept being fired. I maintained my composure, motioning for the gathered employees to return to their work areas. Richard, this isn't appropriate. The FBI is already investigating the Phoenix sabotage. Making a scene won't help your situation. The FBI? He laughed, bitterly. Of course. You're destroying me completely, aren't you? Not satisfied with taking my job, my reputation, my future? You want me in prison too? You sabotaged company technology for personal gain, I replied calmly. Those were your choices, not mine. I built this company, he insisted, struggling against the security guards. Everything significant at Helix came from my leadership. Michael stepped forward. Including the failed Phoenix project you deliberately sabotaged, or the Meridian acquisition strategy you stole from Eliza? Richard's eyes narrowed as he recognized Michael. You. This was your plan all along. Find a disgruntled employee, manipulate her wounded pride, use her to take over a valuable company. That's not what happened, I interjected firmly. I was fired for telling the truth about Phoenix. Everything that followed was the consequence of your own actions. Security had called for police assistance, and we could hear sirens approaching outside. Richard seemed to realize his situation was deteriorating further. Listen to me, he said, his tone suddenly shifting to desperate negotiation. We can still fix this. Tell the FBI there was a misunderstanding. Technical differences of opinion, not sabotage. I'll publicly support your leadership. Endorse the new Phoenix direction. It's too late, Richard, I cut him off. The evidence speaks for itself. You deliberately damaged this company, risked hundreds of jobs, and violated your fiduciary duty, all for personal gain. The police arrived, taking custody of Richard from our security team. As they led him toward the elevators, he made one last desperate appeal. Eliza, please. I have a family, a reputation. I can't go to prison. Just tell them you're withdrawing the allegations. His voice cracked with fear as the elevator doors closed on his ashen face. The executive floor remained silent for a long moment after his departure. Then, gradually, employees returned to their tasks, the dramatic scene already transforming into corporate legend that would be whispered about for years to come. That was... Michael seemed at a loss for words. Tragic, I finished for him. Despite everything, seeing someone self-destruct is never satisfying. Back in my office, I found messages waiting from Davenport, our PR team, and several board members who had already heard about Richard's outburst. The incident would require careful management to prevent it from overshadowing our positive momentum with Phoenix and Meridian. As I began drafting responses, a final email arrived from Richard's personal account, sent from his phone just minutes after his arrest. You've won completely. I hope it brings you the satisfaction you sought. But remember this moment, Eliza, when you stand victorious over the ruins of someone else's life. Someday, someone might do the same to you. I stared at the message for a long moment before closing it without reply. Richard still didn't understand. This wasn't about personal victory or satisfaction. It was about protecting a company, its employees, its innovations, and its future from his destructive leadership. That evening, as I met with Davenport to discuss the day's dramatic developments, he asked the question I'd been reflecting on privately, was it worth it? All of this, the takeover, the legal battles, the personal attacks. I considered carefully before answering. If you're asking whether saving Helix from Richard's mismanagement and Lansing's predatory acquisition was worth it, then yes, absolutely. If you're asking whether there's satisfaction in Richard's downfall specifically, I paused, finding the precise truth. That was never the objective. It was simply the necessary consequence of protecting what he tried to destroy. Davenport nodded thoughtfully. What happens now? We rebuild, I replied simply. Phoenix moves forward with its original, viable design. Meridian integrates properly. And we create the company culture that should have existed all along, one built on innovation, integrity, and genuine leadership. As I looked out over the city skyline from the boardroom windows, I could see Helix's reflection in the neighboring glass towers, still standing, still strong, despite the storm it had weathered. Richard had tried to break what I had helped build, thinking I would simply walk away. He had been terribly, catastrophically wrong. 6 months after Richard's dramatic arrest in the Helix executive suite, I stood at the podium in our largest conference center, addressing shareholders at our annual meeting. The room was packed, with attendance nearly double previous years, a testament to the remarkable story that had unfolded and the company's extraordinary turnaround. The past year has challenged Helix in unprecedented ways, I began, looking out over the attentive faces. From leadership upheaval to technology sabotage to an attempted hostile takeover. Yet today, I'm pleased to report that Helix isn't merely surviving, we're thriving. The financial slides told a compelling story. Stock price up 87% since Richard's departure. Revenue growth accelerated to 22% year over year, and profit margins expanded from 16% to 23%. The Phoenix technology, now rebranded as Nexus, was generating significant market excitement following successful beta deployments with 3 major clients. The Meridian acquisition had been fully integrated, creating synergies that exceeded even my original projections. These results weren't achieved despite recent challenges, I continued, advancing to the next slide. In many ways, they were achieved because of them. Crisis revealed both vulnerabilities and strengths we might never have discovered otherwise. From my position on stage, I could see Davenport nodding approvingly in the front row, alongside other board members who had supported my appointment. Michael and the KCP team sat nearby, their significant shareholding now a stable, long-term investment rather than an activist position. After presenting the financial and operational highlights, I addressed the topic everyone was curious about, but hesitant to raise directly. Many of you have followed the legal proceedings involving former CEO Richard Keller. While Helix has cooperated fully with authorities, we've remained focused on our business rather than the past. However, for transparency, I can confirm that the criminal case has been resolved through a plea agreement announced yesterday. The room grew even quieter. Richard's downfall had become a cautionary tale in corporate circles, discussed in hushed tones as a stunning example of how quickly fortunes could reverse. Mr. Keller has accepted responsibility for securities fraud and corporate sabotage. He will serve 14 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release, and has agreed to significant financial penalties. Helix considers this matter closed and will have no further comment on these proceedings. What I didn't mention were the personal attacks that had continued intermittently until Richard's final plea deal. The anonymous accusations sent to board members, the negative stories planted in industry publications, the social media campaigns questioning my qualifications. All had failed, dissolving against the solid results we continued to deliver. Looking forward, I continued, shifting to the future-focused portion of my presentation. Helix is positioned for unprecedented growth. The Nexus platform launches commercially next quarter. Our Meridian integration has opened 5 new market segments, and our innovation pipeline is stronger than at any point in company history. I clicked to a slide showing our updated organizational structure, flatter, more collaborative, with clear accountability and strengthened technical leadership. Ava Rodriguez now served as Chief Technology Officer. Nate had been promoted to Chief Strategy Officer. Even Darcy from Marketing had taken on an expanded role as Head of Corporate Communications. Perhaps most importantly, we've transformed our company culture. Helix now operates with radical transparency, collaborative decision-making, and a fundamental respect for evidence over opinion. Ideas are evaluated on merit, not on who proposes them. Success is measured by sustainable value creation, not quarterly window dressing. As I concluded my formal remarks and invited questions, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. 6 months ago, Helix had been a company at war with itself, damaged by poor leadership and deliberate sabotage. Today, it was cohesive, energized, and forward-looking. The Q&A session reflected this transformation. Shareholders asked insightful questions about technology roadmaps, market expansion, and talent development. Not about drama, controversy, or personality conflicts. The company had moved beyond the Richard chapter decisively. After the meeting, I joined Davenport and several board members for lunch in a private dining room overlooking the river. "Remarkable presentation," Margaret Chen commented as we settled at the table. "Particularly impressive given where we were a year ago. The board made the right decision," Davenport added, his expression satisfied. "Though I doubt any of us anticipated quite such a dramatic path." Raj Gupta laughed softly. "An understatement. From fired director to CEO battling corporate sabotage and FBI investigations. It reads like a thriller, not a corporate transition." "Let's hope the sequel is considerably more boring," I replied with a smile. "Steady growth and innovation make for dull headlines, but excellent shareholder returns." As lunch progressed, conversation shifted from Helix's recent past to its future prospects. The board had unanimously approved my permanent appointment as CEO 3 months ago, removing the interim qualifier that had initially accompanied my position. The vote of confidence had been gratifying, but the true satisfaction came from seeing my strategic vision for Helix becoming reality. Later that afternoon, I returned to my office to find Michael waiting, casually reviewing industry reports at my conference table. "Successful shareholder meeting," he observed. "You barely mentioned how close we came to losing everything." "History is written by the victors," I replied, joining him at the table. "No need to emphasize the crisis once it's resolved." "Speaking of resolved," Michael slid a folder across to me. "Victor Lansing is stepping down as CEO of TechVantage Holdings. Apparently, the board lost confidence following the failed Helix acquisition and subsequent revelations." I reviewed the press release without comment. Lansing hadn't faced criminal charges. He'd maintained plausible deniability regarding Richard's sabotage, but his reputation had suffered irreparable damage. The Phoenix Nexus technology he'd tried to acquire through manipulation was now positioned to become a market leader, while his own company struggled with declining relevance. "Are you feeling satisfied?" Michael asked directly. "With how everything turned out?" I considered the question carefully. "Satisfied with Helix's position? Absolutely. Satisfied with building the company culture I always believed was possible? Definitely." I paused, finding the precise truth. Satisfied with Richard and Lansing's downfall specifically? That was never the objective. Even after the way Richard fired you? The personal attacks, the apartment break-in, the false accusations? Those were symptoms of his fundamental character flaws, the same flaws that made him a destructive leader, I replied. "I didn't set out for revenge, Michael. I set out to protect what I'd helped build from someone willing to destroy it for personal gain." Michael nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Though I suspect most people in your position would have enjoyed the comeuppance more openly." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But focusing on Richard's downfall would mean he's still influencing my decisions and priorities. I prefer looking forward." After Michael left, I spent some time alone on the executive balcony, watching the city transition from afternoon to evening. 1 year ago, I had stood outside this building after being unceremoniously fired, wondering what would come next. Now I led the company, having transformed it into something stronger than it had been before. The journey had been extraordinary by any measure, from dismissed director to CEO, from outsider to architect of renewal, from target of Richard's casual cruelty to the leader who exposed his sabotage and corruption. Yet the most meaningful victory wasn't personal. It was seeing Helix flourish under the leadership and culture I'd envisioned. The Phoenix technology that Richard had tried to destroy was now poised to transform its market. The Meridian acquisition he'd mishandled was generating tremendous value. The talented people he'd sidelined were now driving innovation throughout the organization. My assistant interrupted my reflection with a message. Final preparations complete for tomorrow's Nexus launch event. The team would like you to review the demonstration sequence when you have a moment. Tell them I'll be right there, I replied. As I headed toward the R&D labs where the Nexus team waited, I passed by what had once been Richard's extravagant private conference room. I'd repurposed it into a collaborative innovation space, replacing the imposing single chair at the head. With a democratic round table, the ostentatious artwork with whiteboards and digital displays. Like everything else at Helix, it had been transformed to serve a better purpose. Richard had fired me without cause, believing I would simply disappear. Instead, I had returned to reclaim and reinvent the company he nearly destroyed. The injustice had been corrected, not through petty revenge, but through building something better from the ruins of his mismanagement. That was the true victory. Not that Richard had lost, but that Helix had won. The Phoenix Project, sabotaged and left for dead, had risen from the ashes with a new name and brighter future. In many ways, so had I. "Ms. Chen?" Ava called from the lab doorway. "We're ready when you are." "Coming," I replied, leaving the past behind and stepping toward the future we were building. After all, the best revenge wasn't firing the boss who fired you. It was showing everyone exactly why he should never have fired you in the first place. Up. Next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.